Paris Saint-Germain. Rice insists they'll try and play their normal game.
We're not going to change the way we play for anyone. No way we're just going to go out there and sit back. You know, we're here to win the game. We're here to make a statement. And like I said, we want to get to the final. So we need to be ready to go and do that.
Declan Rice there. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Pienaar Friends on Times Radio with NatWest Cushion.
It is really good to have you with us on Pienaar Friends, and out of good conversationing, good company, almost invariably, I should say absolutely invariably, and it's certainly going to be that way this evening because we have with us Mikey Smith from the Mirror.
Hello.
Good to see you, and of course Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. Lovely to see you, Kate.
Hi, John.
As always. I want to start with you first. Let me just say, join in. Send us a text, send me a tweet, text 87222, start with the word Times, maybe a tweet to @Times Radio. Always good to get a voice note when you move to send us one of those. For some reason, I especially enjoy those on WhatsApp, 0333 003 2353, and you can see us as well as hear us if you go to the YouTube Times Radio channel. So join us, stay with us, join in, and let's all have an interesting conversation. Kate, what's your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is that we're going to hear a lot more from this thing called Blue Labour. I don't know if listeners have got their head around it yet, but this is a faction inside the Labour Party. It kind of is what it says on the tin, a blue-collar, pro-union, pro-nationalisation, quite anti or hardline on immigration and crime faction in the Labour Party. And they're going to they've been in fashion for a while, but they've been gaining influence because obviously with the rise of Reform and Nigel Farage stealing all those council seats of Labour, we're expecting Labour to try and take on that threat, potentially by embracing some of the ideas of Blue Labour.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it was founded about 15 years ago by this guy called Maurice Glassman, who's an academic and Labour activist who's based in North London. He wrote for us at the weekend, and he gave Keir his advice of what he would do to turn things around in Number 10.
Yes.
And it was basically ditch a lot of the net zero stuff,
yes.
Get really tough on immigration,
yeah.
Nationalise those key industries, so don't just stop at one steelworks, go further, and increase massively the size of the armed forces, which again would create a kind of industrial base which we could economically grow from, and get tough on crime. So, and the other one is to quit the ECHR, which is very linked to immigration.
Yeah.
But that is obviously a very radical prescription, which Keir Starmer's going to not probably do much of it. But I just think it's interesting that we're seeing this new faction emerge in the party.
Yeah, but as you say, Kate, they've been around a while, and they were there when Labour was looking for a way back, looking for a way to climb out of the hole. Blue Labour, as I recall, they're one of their great standard phrases was flag, faith and family, and Lord Glassman was a part of that, Maurice Glassman, and so was John Cruddas. You remember John Cruddas?
Yeah.
The Dagenham MP. They spoke for working class Labour people, and not in the old Labour mould, and they were pretty influential in the thinking of the Labour Party on the way back into office. And now it's interesting they're getting even more traction now, because that's what you're saying.
Exactly. He's meant to have the kind of ear of Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's powerful chief of staff behind the scenes. But when you say that, what was it, flag, faith and family, we saw a lot of that from Labour in the election campaign. I mean, the flag was everywhere. They were embracing kind of royalty, patriotism, faith with it. But we've probably seen that recede a bit when they've been in government.
Yes.
And I think that Blue Labour is going to be quite instrumental in pushing Number 10 into embracing that even more.
And Mikey, the Blue Labour faction crowd movement, and they will feel they've got in some ways a bit of a wind in their sails, maybe just more of a need for their arguments when we see that mainstream politics now has to deal with the Reform UK Party, and their arguments on the Blue Labour side, mind you, the soft left and the further left say the same thing, that they think they're the answer to this particular problem. The argument, at the very least, it's getting really quite lively.
Yeah, I mean, if they ever had an opportunity to push this sort of stuff into Number 10, this is the opportunity. I do think it's interesting that this stuff was, as Kate says, very, very much sort of at the forefront during the election campaign, and maybe they've lost a little bit of focus in Downing Street since then. This might be something that they can rally around as the laser focus that Morgan McSweeney likes.
Yes. What's your thought for the day, mate?
My thought for the day, I had a funny one coming in, and then I saw the sad news that Lord Etherton had died yesterday. Now, if you don't know who Lord Etherton is, he was the first openly gay High Court judge. And he last year published an absolutely searing, damning report into the treatment of LGBT people in the military during the ban on gays in the military, which was only lifted in 2000. But during the years where it was in place, something like 20,000 serving personnel were drummed out of the military. Some of them were imprisoned. Some were outed to their families against their will. They faced bullying. I've written about the sort of consequences of this quite a lot over the last couple of years, with some of the campaign groups involved, and spoken to a lot of the people who were affected by it, and have a lot of them have suffered really with their mental health since then, and I think they would all be united in being very, very grateful to Lord Etherton, who wrote this report, which it did not pull any punches. It was absolutely searing, and led to first Rishi Sunak last year giving an apology on behalf of the government for the policy, and after Labour came into power, they agreed reparations of up to £70,000 each for people affected, and it was just this huge, really quite cruel policy, which not a lot of people know anything about. And every time I introduce it to someone, they're absolutely shocked at how long it was going on.
Yeah, more than quite cruel. I mean, unambiguously cruel. I've spoken to a fair few people in this studio on this programme of people who were victims of those anti-gay purges in the British military, who had to keep their sexual identity a secret, and when they came out, they were purged, they were pursued and punished, driven out of their role in uniform. When these were, in so many cases, they were patriots. They wanted to serve their country in uniform, and it is a mark of society and social attitudes moving in the right direction, where that sort of treatment of gay people back then, it was not so long ago, now seems unthinkable, seems absolutely reprehensible.
Yeah, it's incredible, that really, isn't it? We're talking, when was the ban lifted? 2000. So that's, I mean, it's 25 years ago, but that's really, it doesn't feel that long ago. But it feels unimaginable that you would have got that kind of treatment and sheer scale of blatant, open cruelty and discrimination now. Things have changed so much, but obviously he did lots of important work in bringing those stories to light.
One of the things that always struck me was how often you talk to some of these people, and they not only had been outed to friends and family against their will, but because of the time when it was, they were going back to communities and having to explain why they'd been drummed out of the service to people who probably would not have been supportive of them at the time. And a lot of people suffered quite badly with their mental health and lost their entire careers because of it.
Did you say you had a lighter idea in mind before?
I was going to suggest that Donald Trump probably, if you think about it, could probably take Paddington in a fight. Which was
You're quoting Sir Ed. Better remind us, Mikey, what you're talking about.
This is Ed Davey, who got up in PMQs and is often giving advice to Keir Starmer about how he should deal with the trade negotiations with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who has recently suggested 100% tariffs on foreign films coming into the US, and he told Keir Starmer to warn Donald Trump not to pick a fight with James Bond. Understandable. Bridget Jones, less so. And Paddington Bear. I reckon I could take Paddington in a fight. I can't imagine Paddington would want to fight. He would just give you a strong stare, and that would be enough. I kind of quite like the idea that Paddington Bear is a symbol of national pride. You remember from the recent commemorations at Buckingham Palace, where we saw Paddington sitting down for tea with the late Queen. Anyone who remembers that will never ever forget it. He's a symbol of
of the flag. And I think I prefer Paddington doing that job as the ones that American movies offer. I prefer Paddington to Captain America. That would be one.
Captain America, obviously, also made in Britain.
Well,
also filmed in the UK. So
a very good point. All right, we're going to move on. We've got more to talk about, some slightly more serious politics. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Times Radio Breakfast with Nationwide. Start your day with Times Radio's essential morning briefing with intelligent conversation and incisive analysis from some of the most respected names in politics, culture and entertainment. Hear well-informed opinion and quality journalism on all the big stories making the headlines. Times Radio Breakfast. Tomorrow morning from 6 with Nationwide. A good way to bank.
Latest politics, business and sports news of the day.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
And here on Pienaar and Friends, we've got Mikey Smith from the Mirror and Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. We've been talking about patriotism. Started off by Kate talking about Blue Labour, that movement, which has been around a while, now feels maybe its time has come, which gets you into a conversation about Blue Labour, faith, flag and family, which naturally is a short leap from there to Paddington Bear, as the guy we've now anointed as our favourite national icon. And from there, it got you to tattoos. Now, why did it get us to tattoos? Because just while we were listening to that break, our producer on the programme, Ollie, shared with us all that he has a tattoo of Paddington Bear on his upper arm. So I always thought Ollie had profoundly patriotic leanings, and now that's absolutely confirmed. Have you got any tattoos, Mikey?
I do. I have two. They're both of the logos of rock bands. The Wild Hearts, who are the greatest rock band of all time,
Right.
hail from the northeast.
You just go back to your wild days, didn't you?
My much younger days, yes, when I had various coloured hair, and I
Various
decided
coloured
What colour hair did you have?
I had green hair for a long time.
Did you?
I had purple hair for a bit and white hair for a while.
Listeners,
and
currently Mikey has quite tightly cropped hair.
I have absolutely no hair. It's the result, I suspect, of all of that bleach at the time.
Right, I've got a tattoo on my left bicep, and unlike yours, it's not a relic of my wilder days. It's a mark of my dotage in my later unwild days. I thought, well, why not? If I didn't do it now, I never will. So I put on a Crystal Palace eagle, my beloved Crystal Palace football club,
very committed.
marked on my left arm. Kate.
I feel a bit uncool now because I'm the only one here without a tattoo. I did always used to think I'd get one, and I did think of one that I was going to get. And I wanted, but I never got it. But anyway, I wanted to get a picture of ants going up, like crawling up my arms. So it looked like you had a swarm of ants.
Really?
Yeah, it's from this like surrealist film from the 20s. It looks quite cool. This woman dissolves and becomes ants. But
That was your unique idea, or was it a thing at the time?
no, it was in a film in the 20s.
No, but
that was my idea for a tattoo.
Uniquely inspired.
I've not seen anyone else with a swarm of ants on their arm.
That's quite a cool thing to do.
Thanks. I always thought that would be a very cool tattoo. However, I was also aware that you would need to be able to carry that tattoo off for the rest of your life. And I just didn't back myself.
Yeah.
I thought it would date on me.
Yeah.
And you seem to agree, John.
No. I think I hear where you're coming from. I think it would be a cool thing to do, but I also get the sort of permanent side.
Yeah.
Which is why I think those of us who've done it in later or earlier life put it somewhere where you don't always see it, right?
Yeah.
Under a sleeve or somewhere. Surprising people, I don't want to spend too long on tattoos, but the great David Dimbleby, one of our great broadcasters, another national icon, he's got a tattoo on his shoulder. It's a scorpion.
And didn't he get that recently? That's not
that
that
was
old.
a few years ago.
Oh, it's a few years ago.
But not when he was a young man. Anyway, enough of that. Interesting.
Has Keir Starmer got a tattoo?
Now we've got to talk about that. Has Keir Starmer
I don't know.
got a tattoo?
Should we text number 10 and ask? We could ask in lobby tomorrow.
Do a survey of the cabinet before we meet again. Do us a bit of a tattoo survey of the cabinet. Now I want to talk about, because it's an easy leap from tattoos to international trade. So we're going to go to the deal that's coming. Maybe, according to some reports, FT suggests that we may be seeing this much heralded a trade deal between Britain and the European Union. Maybe even this week, and it's already Wednesday. First of all, guys, are you picking up on any such thing?
They've been gearing up to this for a while, so this is like this long-awaited EU-UK reset and trade deal. The thing that I had a few weeks ago was the fishing water rights would probably be renegotiated.
Yes.
And that they were preparing to probably cave to the French on that and renew and give more fish to the EU. So that had been in the ether a few weeks ago.
Right.
That was kind of linked to another deal, which is the Ukraine, the Defence Pact, which we're looking at doing with the EU. But therefore, you've been getting kind of murmurs and some chatter that this stuff's been gearing up.
Yeah.
They've obviously drawn up some plans of what they think is palatable and what's not.
That would be a way, the deal on fish would be a way of getting Macron on side over fishing rights, because the French were saying, look, we all need more weapons. We've got to rearm. We've got 150 billion euros in a fund there to spend on rearming out of EU funds, but Brits can't have a touch of it while they have their fishing rights as they stand. So we want fishing and arms for fish. Seems like a curious sort of trade-off, but they seem maybe to be heading towards some sort of accommodation. Meanwhile, there has been movement, according to our very own Oliver Wright in the Times, movement on youth mobility. So there will be more, not total, but more youth mobility as part of this deal, from what we hear. Well, Mikey, why don't you take us through what we now understand?
So this is what we've been looking at really since Keir Starmer turned up in Downing Street, which is that the EU would like for the under 30s to be able to come here. I think it's for 2 years, is it?
3 possibly.
3 possibly.
No, I thought Yvette Cooper was looking for a 1 year limit. I don't know where that's got to.
I think that maybe that is a matter that's being negotiated.
Yeah.
But this is obviously not full on a return to free movement.
Yes.
That is still very much a red line as far as number 10 is concerned. But they've been saying since day one. I remember going to Berlin with Keir Starmer really early after he won the election, and these questions already popping up at that point about this youth mobility scheme, which is something the EU has wanted, but we've been maybe a little resistant to. But we haven't ever really ruled it out. Mm-hmm. Number 10, the line from number 10 has consistently been, there is no plan for a youth mobility scheme, which is not a denial.
Yes. I need to correct something I just said a moment ago. I was talking about expectation of a deal this week. There is such an expectation if it happens, but that's the US deal, not the European Union deal.
Oh, sorry, so that's this month, isn't the EU one?
Some talk of that may be coming really, really quite soon. And again, useful stuff there if there can be a deal, especially for the motor industry, the British motor industry. Those high-end brands have taken a big hit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this... The government's been busy negotiating trade deals. So they've just announced the Indian one. We're expecting this big reset with the EU, which is all going to be in the detail of how much do we think here is going to unpick Brexit and soften those red lines in order to get a new economic deal and access to that defence pact. And then we've got this US trade deal as well, which Peter Mandelson has been working on over in the US. And that is all about trying to get these carve-outs from these punitive tariffs. Meanwhile, Donald Trump keeps announcing new tariffs. So, we really don't know where we are with that. I'd like to just take issue with something Mikey just said on the EU deal. Because I do think PM, Keir Starmer and his team have been saying for again, no return to free movement. We're committed to these Brexit red lines. And we all knew that was doublespeak and that they would come back And, I mean, softening red lines is a very indulgent way of describing it. Really unpick, really kind of almost rub out some of these red lines and turn them positively pink. But anyway, at least they've been denying this, effectively denying, not very hard, but effectively denying this free mobility, youth mobility scheme for a very long time. And then bang, what do we hear? They are doing it. So it does make you think, what can you trust them, what they say? I remember something else they said there was no plan to do, and that was to tear up the 28 billion a year Green Pledge.
Yeah.
And then they did indeed do it.
Yes.
We all know they're going to do it, but that doublespeak I don't think helps anyone. I'm not a fan of that doublespeak.
I think at some point we have to all, as a nation, be grown-ups about how trade deals work, and we're not going to get everything we want. We're going to have to give concessions on some things because, in return, the EU gives up some things that are important to them as well. So it was pretty clear from early on, and I don't think this is a return to free movement. This is, a time-limited thing for a select group of people who, are not really what... I don't necessarily think that this is what people were thinking of. I don't think most people would think that this is the same as free movement once you see the details of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully the government will tell us the details.
Hopefully they will. They still haven't confirmed, obviously, that this is happening, but it's likely to happen.
Well, it seems like whatever free movement deal, and it does seem to be one, doesn't it? In the pipeline, it's going to be rather heavily constrained.
Yeah.
It's going to be time limited. There's going to be a cap on numbers. That's a long way from free movement as it existed under the European Union, where it was literally come and go as you choose.
Look, that's obviously true, and there have been other there's other examples they can point to. Our deal with Australia as an obvious one. Anyone that's ever worked in a pub in London will know Aussies come over, stay here a couple of years, work in the pub in London. But what I would say is this does tee up a broader issue, right, which is Keir Starmer has to get those immigration incoming numbers down, and anything that cuts against that is going to come back to haunt him. Now, it's not going to necessarily ruin him. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not worth him considering, but immigration will be a huge issue over the coming years.
It's going to be coming down really significantly.
Well, from 1 million, what was it, 950,000?
Sure. Yeah.
You're going to have to bring them right down. We're not talking about, they've dipped from 950 to 650 to maybe 500,000. You're going to have to bring them right down. Nigel Farage and that reform threat that everyone is talking about. And by the way, Labour MPs across the political spectrum of the Labour Party are panicking about. They're going to expect those numbers down, and reform's going to turn the screw on Labour if they don't succeed with that. So yes, trade deals come with visas, it comes with elements of movement, but that comes at a cost, which is those numbers.
Tell me, Kate, are you one of those who are feeling affronted about the part of the deal with India that was announced yesterday that means that Indians seconded to companies in this country won't have to pay national insurance contributions or employers' national insurance contributions? Now, that's being seen as two-tier taxation and so on. Are you one of those who share that sense of affront about that?
I thought what I really thought was so interesting about the announcement of the Indian trade deal yesterday is we have long been anticipating this. I remember travelling with Boris Johnson, and this was the entirety of what we talked about. We're going to get a trade deal by Diwali. Come on. We didn't. Then Rishi Sunak, we all thought he might be the man to seal the deal. Now, I think what's really fascinating is Keir Starmer has inked this deal. That should be a good news story. Yeah. They should be landing that big on the front pages. But I see the Times here, and the Times front page splash anger at Indian payoff.
Labour and opposition.
Yeah, Labour have not been able to land what should be a very good story because of this taxation issue.
Is it a wrong thing to do? I mean, this sort of reciprocal deal on tax, so you avoid double taxation. It's been around for years. There are at least 17 on some estimate, and maybe dozens on others, where this very same arrangement applies. It's not new. Is the affront not maybe a bit manufactured?
Well, there's two things that are true. One, this has long been a demand by India, the national insurance carve-out. I remember talking to people ages ago around the department in negotiations, and they were always concerned that they couldn't do that because it would look so bad to British taxpayers. So clearly, to anyone that's been following these negotiations for the last few few years. There's been a change there, I think. Second thing is, no wonder, I mean, it's an easy open goal for the Tories. They call him two-tier Keir. What's the latest one? Two-tier tax Keir. I mean, anything that rhymes is obviously good, but he's let them accuse him of that by ramping up national insurance contributions.
The same thing goes for Europe and for Japan and other countries too.
Yes, but this is all... I go back to my original point, which is it's about the perception. The thing I'm walking away with is noticing Number 10 have struggled to land a good news story here.
What do you think, Mikey?
I think Kate's pretty much got it right, which is that this isn't necessarily a problem in the policy, it's a problem in the communication of the policy. They should have... It feels like, and I'm certain this wasn't the case, but it feels like this kind of... They tried to get this in under the radar and people spotted it. Not unreasonably. I think they should have found the argument for it ahead of time and prepared the way for it. You make the argument, you find some case studies where this is, a helpful thing for the country, and you make a bigger deal out of, OK, we gave them this, but this is what we get in return.
Yeah.
But
it's not new.
Suddenly, no, it's not new.
In a conflict between, I've got to say, I'm sort of purist on this, but if there's a conflict between perception and reality should win.
But look, this is the government's policy. They've been negotiating this trade deal for nearly a year. Before them, Rishi was. Before them, Boris's administration. They should just own this. Why have they
this arrangement is a continuation. It's not a new way of dealing with taxation.
I'm not saying it is, obviously, but what I'm saying is, why haven't they landed and owned this story bigger? It's theirs to explain. This is their policy. It's theirs to explain.
Yeah.
And then, really bizarrely, they landed it so quietly that Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader who can't land anything, no one's listening to a word she's saying, right? She's kind of like drowning in that position at the moment. But she manages to slide this goal,
She did for a bit, and then some Indian negotiators pointed out, hang on, no, this was very much on the table when Kemi Badenoch
was... It's her attack line on the front page of the Times.
But this afternoon...
on page 2 of the Sun.
The negotiators from India have come out and said, no, this was very much on the table when Kemi Badenoch was doing her negotiations, and she was positive towards it.
Well, yes, we've always known this was a demand of India. It has always been a demand of India.
All right, we're going to move on. I'm going to hear from... we're going to get what goes on after this programme. Fascinating stuff coming up. I'll share that with you in just a moment. And a really interesting story on the Middle East. It is and America. Alistair Dorber in Washington for the Times has got a really interesting story on that to share with us in a little while here on Pienaar and Friends after the news with Tom Crowstor.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, John. Good evening. The government says there'll be no winners if tensions between India and Pakistan continue to escalate. 26 people have reportedly been killed in missile strikes in Pakistan, which Delhi says was in response to a deadly attack on tourists in India-controlled Kashmir last month. Pakistan has denied responsibility. The Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel is also calling for calm.
This is clearly a precarious moment, and we want to see tensions ease between India and Pakistan. We want to avoid a state-on-state military escalation. We're also clear that India has the right to take reasonable and proportionate steps to defend itself and to dismantle the vile terrorist infrastructure that has caused death and continues to threaten them.
Cardinals have taken an oath of secrecy at the Sistine Chapel. The process of electing a new pope has started in Vatican City. The public spending watchdog says the cost of housing asylum seekers in hotels in the decade to 2029 will be 3 times higher than previously thought. The National Audit Office is telling the Home Office to expect a bill of £15.3 billion. The government says it's working on bringing down the cost to the taxpayer.
So we'll carry that, or at least the key information from it, if and when it does. Also, a special hearing at the infected blood scandal, as you've been talking about today. I've invested in this because the issue for postmaster compensation, which is a story I've followed for a number of years, is been headline news over the last 15 months. The infected blood scandal goes back many more years, and yet we seem to be incapable of compensating people properly when the state has done them harm. And even after the infected blood scandal laid its report before Parliament last year, we've got a special hearing being convened by the inquiry chair in order to try and discern why so many people still can't get their hands on the proper compensation they're due. So we'll be chewing over that. And I've got a special guest after 9:30 this evening, a lady called Rosie Kay, who's a choreographer and dancer who was cancelled for having gender-critical views. She was actually thrown out of her own dance company, expelled from it. She last night launched a report via her new organisation called Freedom in the Arts, which is called Afraid to Speak Freely. And it's found that there's a kind of monoculture within the artistic community in this country. And this has been borne out by statistics which this report has gathered, where people are caught up in groupthink and they're afraid to have the wrong critical thoughts and can find themselves losing work for having the wrong opinion. So the report's been presented. It sounds like a pretty dire situation. So we're going to be asking the question, well, how do you change it?
Okay, fascinating stuff. Nick with us right after Pienaar Friends at 7 o'clock. Now, we've got Mikey Smith here, we've got Kate Ferguson here, and we are now joined from the other side of the pond by Alistair Dorber, our Times colleague in Washington, D.C. Hi to you, Alistair.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks for coming and joining us, Alistair. I want to get straight onto this story, which you've got in the Times now. It's there in the digital edition. Recommend people take a look at that story. Tell us a little bit about it, Alistair. It is about America taking a hand, or at least discussing taking a hand, in the running of Gaza. So I'll leave it there. You tell us, take it away. Tell me about your piece.
Well, there are reports coming out of both Washington and Israel today that the Americans and the Israelis are holding serious and pretty high-level discussions about the US essentially running Gaza while it's rebuilt, while the war comes to an end, in a way that it did in Iraq 20 years ago. Now, I think it's likely to find quite a lot of opposition in the Middle East. I think it's going to have quite a lot of opposition in Congress as well. But ahead of Donald Trump's trip to the Middle East next week, it seems that's the talking point between the Israelis and the Americans.
It's a fascinating story, Alistair. I mean, the obvious question that occurs to me, and I'm sure to many of us, we'll see whether this thing flies. And you've just floated one idea as to an obstacle it will run into, or maybe several, in the shape of Arab states. But we are in the case of Iraq. That was U.S. administration and U.S. security. They presided over an American military presence, which kept the kept the peace with greater or lesser degrees of success in Iraq. Are we, as far as we know, talking about America providing the security as well as the oversight? Because for Israel to carry on doing that would count as an American supervised continuing occupation. Do we know the answer to that?
We don't. The talks, we believe, are at an early stage. The Israelis are obviously searching for solutions as to what to do with Gaza when the fighting eventually stops. They've made it very clear that the Hamas won't remain in charge. And I think would quite like the idea of the Americans coming in. Now, Donald Trump, speaking earlier this year, talked about America occupying Gaza, talked about America taking over Gaza and displacing the Palestinians. He thought he could turn it into there's a Palestinian Riviera, if you like, build hotels, establish beaches and so forth. But he was very clear at that point that he believed that Israel would supply security. I think there's absolutely no appetite in the White House to get American boots on the ground, potentially putting soldiers and officials in harm's way from residual pockets of Hamas that might still exist there. So
then we're left with the other possibilities. I mean, if we say, look, Israeli security is one, but then you've got the plan that was floated by Egypt prior to this, which is some sort of Palestinian administration, not Hamas, but maybe drawing on some of the leaders from the West Bank, the Fatah party there. I guess we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. What we can say with some certainty is there'll be quite a reaction to this. Now it's out there in the open, Alistair.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the lines that we do know is that were this proposal to go ahead, were an American administration to be put in place, Washington doesn't really fancy the idea, certainly not of Hamas, it regards Hamas as a terrorist organisation, but doesn't really fancy the idea of the Palestinian Authority led by President Abu Mazen, the Fatah faction. It doesn't really fancy them being involved either. I think it would use some Palestinian technocrats to provide support and work, but I don't think either of the main Palestinian factions would take a leading role.
What are we thinking, Kate?
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, what would this even look like if it doesn't entail American boots on the ground, but it's an American run? who would physically run that? And if it's not Hamas or Fatah, like, where could they be drawn from meaningfully in Gaza?
That's a very good question, and we don't know the answer to that. It seems that the Americans are incredibly reluctant to commit troops, especially to the Middle East, where over the last 20 years we know that there's been such a bad experience for them. I suspect that part of the negotiation with the Israelis is about how the Israelis, how possibly the Egyptians, the Jordanians might provide some sort of security as well.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it was last night, guys, that we heard President Trump in the White House make one of those curious sort of teasing Delphic comments when he said, "I've got a very, very big announcement to make." He's off after the weekend in a tour to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and to Qatar. And he said, either before or during that, he'd have a huge announcement, biggest we've heard in many, many years. Well, I suppose, certainly through the eyes and the mouth of Donald Trump, Alistair, this would possibly fill that bill. Maybe this was what he had in mind.
It may well be. There's speculation it could be this. There's speculation about one or two other things. Perhaps Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, which is a system by which Arab countries recognise Israel. We don't know. Sometimes Donald Trump is long on promises and short on delivering on what those promises actually are. But we'll see. I mean, this would certainly be a hugely radical departure from anything we're expecting, and it would also have to be a sell as well to the Republican Party, to the MAGA movement, which is trying to extract itself from foreign adventures when it comes to war and administering other countries. It'd be quite difficult to see if this does work, if it is a flyer, how Donald Trump and the administration sell it to not only the American people but also their own party.
Yeah, we have a very Trumpite sort of idea, but just imagine, first announcing, as he has, he's got a huge announcement to make, then heading off on this tour of the Gulf states, and then finding when he gets there that this thing just blows up on the runway, that it is not a flyer. Because see all sorts of reasons why those Arab states would not go along with such a plan. I don't know what they will say if and when it's floated, but I mean certainly in the case of Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords, well, Saudi Arabia was ready, before this time they were ready to recognise Israel, but that was in exchange for accepting the ambition of a two-state solution in Palestine. And that has, as far as Israel is concerned, that's not just off the table, it's out of the window. So how do you get Saudi Arabia back engaged with that?
I honestly don't know. This seems to come from the Donald Trump playbook of, I can make only I can do it. I can make the impossible possible. Whether he's bitten off more than he is capable of in this case is going to depend on many factors in the region. A lot of people who, as you say, don't talk to each other very kindly, and I think he's going to have just as much of a problem selling it to his base. He went around in the campaign saying he was going to pull out of all foreign wars. Never commit America to another foreign conflict that it couldn't get out of. And I cannot think of another situation that looks more like getting involved in a foreign conflict that you can't get out of.
Yeah, although his base can contort themselves because they love him so much, that they can kind of do U-turns themselves, pirouettes, to embrace what he's saying at that time.
Okay, well, if you stick around just for a few more minutes if you can, Alistair, I know you're busy. Really appreciate you taking time for joining our chit-chat on the programme. One or two other things I want to bounce off you in just a moment. This is Pienaar Friends, of course, on Times Radio, in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. So, Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and Mikey Smith from The Mirror are here with us on Pienaar Friends. So, Alistair is on the line from Washington, D.C. I must ask you, Alistair, the story that broke overnight, another Trump team story, where it seems that the intelligence agencies of the United States, the CIA, the National Security Agency and military intelligence, have all been set to work to go and have a good old spy on Greenland, of all places. How's that gone down where you are?
Well, why Greenland, you might ask, this sort of icy island in the middle of the North Atlantic? Because Donald Trump wants it. He wants it to be part of the US. He wants sovereignty over it. He wants it for its strategic position. He wants it for its mineral wealth. And we know from the noises he made already that in Greenland and Denmark, which has sovereignty over Greenland, there is significant and understandable opposition. It seems, I think the controversy in this story really is that the spy agencies are being lined up to serve in a political way, which is the criticism, that they're being asked to spy on independence movements in places like Greenland, look at people who might be sympathetic to Donald Trump's overtures, in order to try and get his policy across the line, which I'm not sure that's ever been really the point of the US spy infrastructure.
Okay. I mean, I did have an interesting conversation between a couple of those with a deep interest in this. I spoke earlier to Carla Sands, who's Donald Trump's former ambassador to Denmark, which of course has sovereignty over Greenland. She's a chair of Denmark's Defence Committee, or rather Rasmus Jarlov is, of course, that chair. He joined in and they really went at it together. Have a listen back to Rasmus first.
Well, the ambassador is lying on so many accounts here. It's just incredible. I mean, the idea that Denmark should have a surplus on Greenland when we send about $800 million every year to Greenland as a direct subsidy and pay for a lot of other things, and then the idea that we somehow have a surplus out of that because they buy groceries in Denmark for a little part of that money is pretty absurd and has been debunked many times. In the overseas territory of the United States have it much worse than Greenland has. We pay a lot more money to Greenland than the United States pay to their overseas territory. You can just go to American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, or wherever, and you can see that it's not a blessing to become dominated by the United States. They don't even have voting rights. I mean, they have...
We do not seek to dominate anyone.
Oh, sure.
Not true.
And also the idea that China is taking over is completely absurd. China has no aspirations. The only threat to Greenland is the United States.
So that's the Danish politician, Rasmus Jarlov, sticking it to Donald Trump's team in Washington there. Carla Sands, Trump's former ambassador, obviously giving as good as she got there. Just have a listen back to Carla.
I mean, that's very offensive. He knows that Denmark cannot afford to defend Greenland. He knows they've never bothered to develop it. Most of the infrastructure was built there by the U.S. military when we occupied Greenland during World War II and afterward until the end of the Cold War. They only financed and built 3 airports in Greenland because the U.S. government pushed them not to let China pull Greenland into their Belt and Road Initiative, which is what the CCP wanted. We want Greenland and Denmark, all of our allies, to do well, to be secure. But we will not, and I repeat, we will not allow a close-by nation fall into the hands of an adversary.
We are, as you know, the home of measured, considered conversation. Sometimes it gets a little bit spiky, as it did there. Before you leave us, Alistair, this Greenland story it is still near the surface, isn't it? And we can't forget the president telling us, when he was asked, would you consider military invasion of Greenland? And he said, I can't rule that out, my word.
Well, I mean, to Kate's point a few moments ago, the Trump base really is malleable when it comes to fitting into his thinking. I mean, the idea that America would seize sovereignty by force or by any other means over the sovereign territory of another country is just remarkable. And there we've got someone who's in a senior position talking as if it's something that not only could happen but also should happen. I mean, not only have we got Greenland, we've also got the Panama Canal, we've also got Canada, where Trump, has suggested American sovereignty over these places, and initially was laughed off. And as he repeats it time and time again, you realise that he's serious about it. Then you've got to get people like the lady you had there on earlier on, who have to come and present that as a viable and serious policy proposition. Quite where it ends, who knows? But it is quite dangerous, I think.
That's always a handy place to end a conversation like this with who knows. Alistair Dorber, let's talk again soon. I promise you will be invited back very, very soon. Now, let's bring it home just for a bit to our own politics. There's plenty going on there, guys. I want to just pick this out, first of all, which is Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor, who was talking to our very own Andrew Neil a little bit earlier on. They were talking about the Tory party against the background of Nigel Farage's party being on the march. This is what Jeremy Hunt had to say.
Is it at least a possibility, I put it no higher than that, but at least a possibility that your party could be facing extinction?
We can't rule it out. I mean, you look at the massive earthquake in Western democratic politics in other countries, and we are seeing wild swings. I don't think the Conservative Party will ever be extinct, but what may be extinct is the old two-party system that's seen parties swing between one party and the other, and certainly at the moment, voters seem to be split between 5 parties, and that's a very, very big change. But I think it's also important not to exaggerate the woes of the Conservative Party. We're less than a year after the heaviest defeat in our history. It's very unlikely, having kicked us out, voters are going to come running back to the Conservatives within just a matter of months. And we do need to have a period of reflection, and it is going to take a few years before people will give us another look. But I think over time they will, because no one speaks to the Conservative coalition, the Conservative values that are, I think most people recognise, very important for the country, a party that's pro-business, understands wealth creation, understands aspiration, and will run the economy well.
Jeremy Hunt talking to Andrew. He didn't say how many years it might take before people were willing to give the Conservative Party another look. There's only 4 before the next general election. But guys, Kate, serving politicians, ex-minister, yeah, but serving politicians, they're not meant to acknowledge the possibility, even the possibility of their party becoming extinct, are they?
Yeah, no one wants to kind of admit that their party could be dead as a dodo in a few years' time. It's actually astonishing. Sometimes in this country we can think, oh, politics isn't as interesting as in America. But it's astonishing what's going on at the moment. You've had a 2-party state in this country since the dawn of modern politics, and that is potentially being finally ripped up. Really the only thing still properly holding that together is that first-past-the-post system. But you have had reform crash in those local elections, hoovering up votes. Tories are bleeding out to reform. Are reform going to become the new party of the right? Labour politicians, Labour backbench MPs are also very concerned that reform could pose an existential threat to them, which seems bananas given how many MPs they have. But they're eating away into those key industrial former Labour heartlands. Are we going to see Labour have to have a reckoning with itself? Is it the party of the old industrial heartlands of the North and Midlands? Is it this new party of kind of poshos in London, Oxford and Cambridge and the university professors? We're seeing a kind of reckoning with what are people voting for? Those old allegiances, that my dad voted this way, I vote that way, my grandfather voted Labour, they're being torn down. And voters today are more up for grabs than they've ever been before. Yeah,
I mean, those old norms have been being hauled down for a good few years now. I guess the question is that the moment where, where the elastic keeps on going and finally the elastic is broken and we've reached a turn in the historical road? Is that your feeling? We don't know, but what's your feeling, Mikey?
I think there are 2 things to take away from Jeremy Hunt there.
Yeah.
The first is that, this is, as you say, quite an unusual acceptance of what I think to most of the country is the blindingly obvious. Which is that the Conservative Party is in a very, very bad way. And second, I think his explanation for it was lacking in any acknowledgement that his party might have had something to do with its own downfall. Jeremy Hunt, I think I'm right in saying, if not, I think he might have been a minister for longer than anyone else in the last government. I would need to check that, but I think he was. So, this is not someone who has been, on the sidelines during this this 15-year period. But, going back to probably, I think it probably started somewhere around David Cameron agreeing to a referendum.
Yeah.
This has been almost entirely...
Everything always goes back to Brexit, doesn't it, Mikey?
Is it not? The rise of first UKIP, then Brexit Party, then Reform, can entirely be stemmed back to Nigel Farage being given a platform that probably he hadn't earned at that point. And Jeremy Hunt was right there at the time. And he said none of this.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing that both Labour... The interesting thing that both Labour and Tory politicians are saying about their own party, and they haven't said this for very long, is look what's happening elsewhere. In France, in Greece, in Australia, you've had long-established parties being hauled down, and both hierarchies are nervous that it could happen to them. And both acknowledge behind the scenes there is no God-given right to exist as a political party. Now, the big question is, where does their future lie? So we've always, with our first past the post system here, broadly, there's the person that kind of wins, the party that wins the election. It's either Labour or Tory, and the person that wins the election occupies that kind of middle ground. And when I say middle ground, I don't mean it stays static, but who do you trust on the economy? Who do you trust on borders? Who do you trust on health and public services? And that can change, and what that means can change. But now we are seeing a fracturing, and are we going to be more kind of values-based? Are people going to be kind of pickier? And you really could see parties supplanted. I tell you what, when you talk to Labour, it is the Reform Farage threat they're talking about. And you talk to some people in Labour, some senior people in Labour, and they say the next election will be Keir versus Nigel. They're not talking about Kemi. So you know, Jeremy Hunt's right to make that warning, because that's what people in the business of politics are thinking.
Midterm has come very early, though, from maybe too early from Reform's point of view. I mean, I don't know, but you've got to be careful what you wish for in life and in politics. And the success of Reform now, take Durham Council, which Reform has. It's got a multi-billion-pound budget, and we're going to be able to see if they can run things, not just be a vehicle for a protest when people want to protest for reasons we completely understand. You're given a chance to do something, can you do it? And they're going to be judged on that. And that goes for Nigel Farage and the whole lot.
That's true. They're going to be judged on how they run those councils, so they need to run them well. They need to run those mayoralties and deliver on their promises. But you remember, our electoral system of local councils is kind of nuts. There's elections every year, basically. And next year is the big ones with more of those Labour boroughs, more of those Labour councils up, where Reform could do even better.
Yeah.
So you could actually be looking at a way where the way our electoral system works, they're building over 3 years, general election, this many votes, then Durham Council, then the second set. So they could actually help Reform having those elections periodically.
And this sense of alarm on the Labour side, you pick it up too, Mikey?
Yeah, a little bit. I think I was talking to some MPs last night who were saying that maybe this has come at the right time for them in the cycle, in that there's plenty of time for after having run a slightly smug campaign of we can do it where no one else can.
All right,
they get to fall over.
Conversation, guys. Kate and Mikey, thank you. Thank you to you for listening. Our producer was Ollie Cole and Angus Mitchell. Our technical operator, Isaac Marley. Coming up, Nick Wallace, who's in for Kate Borsay on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thank you very much to John Pienaar and his friends. It is 7 o'clock. My name is Nick Wallace, in for Kate Borsay this evening on the Evening Edition. Coming up,
rising tensions